Awesome. Well, welcome to our series, Real Talk, Big Ideas. We do these kind of conversations on interesting topics, and Monique has been wonderful to join me today. I'm Dr. Alicia Schatteman, the director of the Center for Nonprofit and NGO Studies here at Northern. I've been here 10 years or 11, I guess it's weird, coming up to 11 years since 2010. I'm an associate faculty member in the public administration as well as our undergraduate nonprofit and NGO studies program. And part of our mission here is also to support the sector. So we do a lot of engagement, bringing in researchers, kind of to talk about different topics. And this conversation that Monique and I are going to have today and with all of you really came about probably a month or so ago. I had an organization, and this happens all the time. I had an organization reach out to me over email to say, hey, we're struggling with something. Can you help us? And I said, well, I'm not sure, but I'll try. And what they were talking about is this was a very kind of traditional nonprofit organization. It's been around for over 30 years. They have a very stable board. But when they looked around the table, they kind of all looked the same. And not that they were intentionally trying to be that way. That's just kind of the way it happened. So they said we could use some help, and we're nervous. We don't want to do any missteps, all those kinds of good things. So I was talking to them and I was taking some notes. I'm like, I think there's probably enough here to have a conversation, and who better to have a conversation with than my friend Monique here at NIU. And, I'll let Monique introduce herself, but I think over the past year or so, we've been trying to be very intentional about working on equity, diversity, and inclusion here at NIU, and then broadly in our community, particularly the community around Northern. But then also the broader conversations about business, nonprofit, government. So I thought this would be a good conversation to get Monique in on. And maybe Monique, I'll let you say a few words about yourself, and then we'll get into our discussion.
Awesome. Sorry about that. I forgot to mute my phone. My mom was calling, so I just hung up on her.
Sorry, Mom.
Sorry, Mom. She's got two other daughters. Hopefully if something's wrong, she'll call them. So this is me being transparent. I'm Monique Bernoudy. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Academic Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I've worked in higher ed. I don't know, I've lost count for like 35 years. I've served on non-for-profit boards. I've worked with non-for-profit organizations. I've worked at 3 universities, attended 3. So I've kind of been around in that nonprofit, private, public sector, and real interested in it. I think that Alicia does a great job. We're fortunate to actually have a major where students can really focus on non-for-profits, which we haven't always had. And I remember being on the ground level with the person that really initiated this, because it was part of their blood and part of who they are, and said, do you think we can get this off the ground? At the time I was working in athletics. I served as an administrator in athletics for 18 years. I said, yeah, I think a number of our athletes would be interested. And so we worked just to try to get students in the class at first, and then just took off. And from a class to a major, and we were fortunate to hire Alicia, Dr. Schatteman, with her really extensive background. And I think the thing that's really, really important is for us all to give ourselves grace, because I think that's the difficulty that I find in the work that I do. So of course, we've always been engaged, and we kind of laugh tongue in cheek that in the last couple of years, it's job security. There's lots of people asking us questions and wanting to be educated as they're aware of things that are going on in our society and our country. And none of this is new. The technology is that brings it to light. And so I think the first thing I would say is give ourselves grace. Not that we don't have to be accountable, not that we don't all have work to do, and not that we aren't part of these systems that cause a level of oppression. But if we focus so much on ourselves and everything that we've done wrong, we can never get it right. So I guess my opening message would be, let's give ourselves grace and then work collaboratively to hopefully have a discussion that helps us to enhance everything that we do. And I say us because I think all education is a two-way street.
And that's what's so awesome to be in higher education is that we're always learning. That's just something we do every day. And, sometimes you forget that all organizations are not institutions of higher learning, right? And you just forget that in the normal day-to-day stuff because we're very fortunate. So when we think about, and maybe when I talked to Monique about doing this, I said, well, let's kind of talk about what is diversifying your board. What does that look like? And then we'll talk about some reasons why you might want to do that and what you're already doing. And then leave you with some kind of tangible things about how do you go about this? How can we improve on what we're already doing? And, Monique and I share the opinion that this is a long game. This isn't a checklist. This isn't a 2021 goal setting. We're going to have a diverse board and then everything's going to be okay. This is like the long game. So those are kind of how we're going to structure. We're going to talk about what diversity is. We're going to get into a little bit of why and then leave you with some hopeful tips because nobody wants to spend an hour and go away feeling bad. we want you to feel hopeful and energized to do this work because that's really what will carry this forward. So Monique, when we think about diversity, and you and I talked about this a little bit, we just did a DeKalb County nonprofit study and we asked folks, do you know things like age, gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, language, income, and disability? That's kind of the big diversity thing that I mean when I refer to diversity. It's not one thing. It's kind of all of those things when we look at it. And then for me, it's around reflecting the community that you serve. So if you're in a community that is all affluent, all one race, all one something, then that might make sense that your board looks that way. But if your community is not that way, so for me, it's also a reflection of community, but thinking about diversity of all of those things, diversity of experience, really, and your backgrounds. That's how I tend to approach this work. And I don't know, Monique, what you think of that and how we do that in your office.
Yeah, it's funny because when people hear diversity, quite honestly, they first think of race. And we really tend to gravitate to one or two areas, either our areas of comfort or our areas of greatest discomfort. And so I think we focus on race because it's one of the areas of greatest discomfort because we don't have appropriate conversations about it. We don't learn about it, we're not accountable. But there's so much that I think is just rich and can enhance everything that we do. And so I've always said you have to be diverse, and I don't care what you're doing and what your goals are. That should always be the goal. And that's, kind of difficult because if you live and work in certain areas, the thought is you have to represent just a constituency. Well, the best way to represent that constituency is to get the broadest voices at the table. And sometimes that's difficult to sell. And so in my office, quite honestly, and this may sound strange, diversity is a white male. And so when I'm looking for staff, and it's not that I'm going to go out and just hire any white male, but if I find a number of qualified candidates, which one am I going to lean towards? I'm going to lean towards the one that offers me the greatest diversity. Looking at it visually, it's a white male. Might not be just a white male. It might be something else. It could be age. It could be the fact that they're from a different part of the country. They could have a different gender identity. Those things are all important because at the end of the day, we all want to be successful. The best way to be successful is to have more heads around the table. There's so many sayings that are out there, more than one head is, two heads is better than one. The same analogy is true really for boards. It's not easy. And I was just in a conversation where even our team was saying, because we were working with another group on campus to help them diversify their staff as they're trying to go out and engage with many different external partners. And our staff, who does this work all the time, said, I don't think any exist out there. And I just called them on the carpet and I said, you've got to be kidding. That's what's said every day. And it's coming from this staff. You've been socialized to think that. I realize that. To me, no one exists that has a different background in the entire United States that can do this work.
Right.
And they got quiet. And I forget sometimes because you also have to look at positionality. And I don't lead as an assistant vice president. I lead as Monique Bernoudy with different skills and backgrounds. And I grew up in Detroit. Now I live in Naperville, Illinois, like total opposite. And I value all of it. And so we started having that conversation. And so I think diversity has to be defined on your own teams. We could give you a nice, broad, perfect, definition, but I don't think that's what you need. And I'm hoping that's not what you want. So I think what you really want is to be able to look at your team and say, what are we missing? Early on, I used a box of crayons. And so I would come in the room and I would pass out sheets of paper and we would color. And I would say, well, name your crayon. And people were real creative. And I'd say, why did no one take the white sheet of paper? Because they would take green, pink, everything but. We would laugh about it. I didn't have to say anything else. We would laugh. And I said, okay, now that box of crayons, what color's missing? I don't know. There's like 24 in here. I don't know which one is missing. There's 48. I said, that's the hard work that we have to do. What is missing? And we may not always know because we're at a loss if something's missing. We don't want people to assimilate. We don't want the white crayon to get yellow or blue or green on it. That's assimilating because we scratch it off. We want everyone to be able to maintain the strengths, the energy, the talents, and the gifts they bring to the table. But we all have to be in a position to value it. If you're not in a position to value whatever the next candidate is you're bringing to the table, then don't do it because it harms you and it harms them. And so you have to have tough conversations. I recently saw it happen on a search committee for a police chief. And the administrator in charge decided that there was a new direction that needed to be taken. And called and asked would I serve on the committee, what did I think about launching it timing-wise in terms of the chief of police. I thought it was great timing. And when I got to the table, I saw a person whose background was a UPS driver, but they had worked in the community and worked with kids and teens, I don't think they had served on, there were 2 or 3 people that never served on a search committee. Somebody else that works with those that are previous felons and they're making that transition to a former police chief, to people that own property in the area. And their backgrounds in terms of race and age were all different. And we bumped heads on a number of things, but we left every day with respect for one another. And in the end, it was unanimous, the candidate that we selected. And it was because we call in our area conversations that matter, the tough conversations, but it was really because he put together a very diverse group. I've been on more search committees than I can even count. Never been on a search committee that was as diverse as that because he decided that the vision was do something different. So some of the constituencies, some of those represented on that search committee really represented the constituency. So that was their vision. So you have to look at your own vision.
Yeah, I think I've had similar kinds of experiences with why would a board kind of want to do this? Why? And you do really have to know who you are and what you're bringing to the table to figure out what's missing. Kind of to your point, you do have to know what you're looking for, and that means you really have to get to know each other's backgrounds. So having the conversations of, I grew up in a low income household, or I grew up with a single mom, or I grew up actually very affluent. I've never been to public housing, or all of those things. You really have to have those discussions at the board level and then figure out, okay, who can really add to our level of experiences that's not here in this room. And I'll give you an example. I was working facilitating a board, I guess it wasn't a board meeting, it's more of a community meeting, and we were putting in a big grant project. And I love those projects. So I was happy to facilitate. And kind of to your same experience, Monique, we had a bunch of folks in the room, and the usual suspects, community leaders, all of those folks were in the room. But there were some people who were there that were from the community. They were very uncomfortable. You could tell because they're like, it is intimidating to walk in that room and there's all these experts that are out there. So it takes a lot for someone to enter that space and feel comfortable enough to share their experiences. So I was like, wow, that's amazing. As they became a little bit more comfortable with us, and we had to do a lot to make sure that we left room for them to speak and room for them to share their experiences. As they started to speak, one of the things, and we were talking about what are the barriers to community development, particularly in this area, and they brought up public transportation. Well, they were probably the only one, or maybe of 2 people that had taken public transportation in the last 25 years, because I did take it as a student. And when I lived in an urban area, that made sense. But I haven't taken public transportation in DeKalb ever. That's just not something that I've done. So I wouldn't have a clue about the bus system. If they weren't there, and maybe somebody else would have piped up, but likely not. They really contributed to the conversation, and it changed a little bit of our direction. In this conversation, we were talking about, say, workforce development, and they're like, yeah, but say, for the example, the buses don't go there to those jobs that pay maybe a little bit more. Did you guys know that? And we're like, no, like, didn't have a clue. Because again, I'm not looking at the bus routes. I don't know kind of how they work. So that always reminds me of, what if she wasn't there? What if she decided not to participate that day? Or what if she wasn't recruited to participate? How would that have shaped what we ultimately put in for this grant, and what kind of ultimately kind of public policy that gets set? So it starts with those very small participation, that it really can make a huge impact. So I think of that now when we're thinking about those kind of projects where we really need to know, okay, what is this going to mean? We better get people in here, or this is going to impact, because it's not going to be me. We change the public bus routes, it's not going to affect me directly. So who's missing? And I think you have to have that conversation with your board. Kind of another instance that we had when I was an executive director, we wanted to, reach out and have more diverse board. And at that time, again, narrowly defined was race. And so, you know, okay, wasn't me, but the board nomination committee, they're like, well, I just met this great African-American couple. They came to this wonderful gala that was had at the gardens or whatever. We should ask them. I'm like, well, they're from the same income demographic. They're both lawyers. They live in your neighborhood. Like, this is not much of a stretch here. Oh, they happen to be African-American. Okay. Well, we actually got one of them, I think, on the board. But what was interesting to them was they actually didn't have the same backgrounds. And so they started to ask a lot of interesting questions that the board wasn't ready for. So when you bring folks in, know that your assumptions will be questioned. Well, why did we do that? Why did we think about that? How come we don't do this? That's what happens when you get diversity of experience. And kind of, Monique, to your point of working on search committees, if you want to bring in a diverse voices, know that you're going to have some of those conversations that could be uncomfortable. I don't know why we do that, but we should maybe think about why we do that. So that gets really tricky. So those are some of my kind of experiences on why it's so needed and what we're missing for the people that we can't really invite in.
So we have some awesome questions.
Awesome.
See them. So
Yeah.
Amy poses a question. If you all wanted to know why I was turning my mic off and on, so you wouldn't hear me typing. For whatever reason, I'm allowed to type. Amy asked a question about building a board. So what do you do building a diverse board from the ground up that might be, different without having a fully existing board? I actually think it's easier to build it from the ground up.
I do too.
Than it is to, because we've all worked on boards and committees, and quite honestly, for me, the process is always the same. It's got to be diverse. I think it's easier from the ground up because you don't have to worry about who's already on the board and when they're rolling off, and you have everything in front of you. Sometimes I think it's easier because at that very moment at the beginning, everyone is pretty laser focused on what your vision is, what your goals are, what your mission is. And of course, we know those are fluid. And sometimes they're works in progress. So I would say you look at those. The example that Alicia just gave in terms of, your constituency. What are you planning to achieve? Because that's who you want to put on the board. And then whatever your first inclination is, what's the next one? Because I can tell you my first inclination is never my best. Not when it comes to board. Sometimes when it comes to creative ideas, it is. I second guess myself. But usually, think of all the people that you put on the board if it was endless, 100 people. And then who do you put on the board and lay them all out? And then what do they all bring to the table? It's kind of like building a house. You might have lots of trades that can build a house, but who can bring you, who's the best electrician? Who's by far the best contractor? And I think you start to look like that. The other thing is you do have to look visually at your board because people are going to look visually at your board. They're not going to look into their backgrounds as we all should. Yeah. And so that's important as well, but you can't stop there. So I think without knowing exactly what you're looking at, if you give us an example, we'll, play with it. But I would say, look at everything. Look, age is another one that's very important.
Yeah.
So you have some people, unfortunately, in our country, we kind of write people off at the ends of the continuum of life. When you get older, we don't necessarily think you're wise unless you're in our families and you're our grandparents or our great grandparents, and then we'll talk to you and gain, tidbits of advice. We do the same with those that are young. Like, oh, they're impatient. They go from job to job. They want to be president in 5 years. Some of that is great because they're not going to be patient. And as frustrating as it can be, they're going to pose the questions. They also are very adept at social media. So they will bring things to the table that you haven't thought about. I try to have people that are young working with me because I'll say, what do you think about this idea? And I'll get that look once we get to know each other. And I'm like, okay, you don't think it's a good idea. Tell me why not. And tell me what's a better idea. Like, you want people that are solution oriented. So if something happens, what is their solution? It can't be, well, let's let the board chair do it. You want people that are solution oriented. But age is also a very important factor. And it's an advantage for boards because I've seen more older people on boards. I seldom see young people on boards because people, I think, forget. I'll see diversity in terms of ethnicity and race and nationality and socioeconomic income. But I think that's the other thing. The other thing I would quite honestly say is don't forget higher education, where you might have some people that are doing research that might be an expert that can sit at your table and quickly tell you the lay of the land currently, things that are in process that you may not be aware of. And if we, I wonder what Alicia has to share beyond that. And then we'll take some of the other questions.
Yeah, I have kind of two thoughts. One is, as you're doing this work, if you think your board isn't necessarily to be as exposed and want to move as fast, is create a junior board. Create a board of young adults that and others that can be kind of a mentorship idea, kind of a growing area where people can sit in an advisory capacity and then think and groom them for committee work or for a board or an advisory committee. So you can have a junior board for younger members or an advisory committee that's made up of community members. Because the toughest thing with getting folks who don't normally serve on boards to serve on boards is experience. They just don't know how they work. Like, what the heck is Robert's Rule of Orders anyway? How is this? Who takes minutes? What goes into minutes? Like, I don't know how all that works. How do you read bylaws and financial statements? Like, it's really, really tough work, and they just need experience to do it. So that's kind of the first suggestion. Maybe create an advisory committee or a junior board. The other thing is to not box yourself in, because I think sometimes boards recruit for specific things. Like, we need to have a finance person. Well, you want to talk about finance, I always joke with my husband. So we have 6 kids, family of 8. I run a mini business at home. Like, if you want to talk finance, I got Excel spreadsheets that can rock your socks, not because I'm a finance expert, is because I have to manage a household of 8 people. So it might not be the CPA you need. It might be someone who has an interest in finance or experience, who was the secretary of the parent association or whatever. You don't look for just like, we need a lawyer, we need a finance person. Maybe you don't. You could grow those skills. They could certainly have some professional development for those skills. You might not need the lawyer finance person. Because the other thing I learned working with boards over the years is finance people are great, lawyers are great, but they're very, very specialized. So we had a contract lawyer who worked for a pharmaceutical company. I'm like, okay, you check the box that you have legal experience. She had never seen a nonprofit from the inside. She didn't know about waivers. She didn't know about all the stuff that we used in our day-to-day. So yes, she was a lawyer, but that was not where she really, enjoyed spending her time. This is a volunteer service. So it shouldn't be like their job on the board. They're volunteers. They want to learn new skills. They want to meet new people. It should be a social kind of experience. So the way they want to spend their time probably isn't what they do for the day job. Like, it's just generally not, right? We all have the broken toilet plumber stories, right? That's just how it works. So think beyond like, we need a lawyer or we need a finance person, to think about what your needs are. Yes, you probably need somebody who wants to sit in the finance committee. Who here would like to learn more about how to read financial statements and work with our CPA or whatever? It's not limited by their job description or their career and occupation. certainly. So those are kind of two things that, and we're thinking about that from here at NIU. We're going to be piloting this idea in the fall of creating, we have a boards and governance class. So for those of you who run nonprofits, you're like, oh my God, that would have been really useful like 20 years ago. We have an entire class dedicated to boards and governance. And those students are going to be junior boards for 2 semesters, partnering with local nonprofit organizations. So they will exist side by their governing board and go through all the same things that their governing board does for those 2 semesters. So it'll be very kind of hands-on learning. So look for those kind of opportunities when you're setting some ideas up for, ideas of how you can kind of diversify your board, but in smaller steps. I know there's some other questions around fundraising, so I wanted to tackle those, Monique, unless you had some other ideas.
No, I think those are good. I've got them on the side just to try to keep up with
Yeah.
them. So the question is, hopefully, if I go out of order, just open your mic or send a chat and say, nope. Like when you stand in line, someone cuts in front of you, just bring it to our attention. Hopefully, I'm keeping up in the correct order. As boards and organizations work to become more inclusive, what are your suggestions for handling fundraising/giving requirements? How do we engage and support those folks without capacity to give at suggested levels?
Yeah, and I think this is a good discussion for your board to have as an organization. So most fundraisers, and I think if there's any fundraisers on the call here, most fundraisers will tell you 2 things. One, it's important that all board members give, period. Hard stop, 100%. And I'm not putting a dollar value on it, but hard stop, every board member should be giving. Because if your own board doesn't believe in your mission, how the heck are you going to convince anybody else to give you $1? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And they should be giving at significant levels to them, whatever that means. So while you're a board member, most of your giving should be directed to the board that you're serving on. That's kind of a thing, right? That's where you should be directing your philanthropy for the time that you're on the board. That's the first thing. The other thing, and this was useful for an organization that I worked with once, they pulled out all board giving and made it a separate line item. And here's why that matters, because some board members say, well, I went to the gala, I bought my $50 ticket, I went to the golf outing, that's my donation. Okay, no, because there was an exchange there. This is a transaction. You want unrestricted gifts, right? That's the granddaddy of all fundraising. So pull it out as a line item, and collectively as a board, what do you think we can do? And you can get historical. You know what as a board, you can pull those numbers out of your database to know what that looks like. And then you say, as a board, we're going to contribute $10,000 to our operating budget next year. That's what we're committed to. How that comes in, I don't care if Mr. Joe Smith gives 5,000, everybody else gives $10. However that works. But as a board collectively, we're saying to the staff, we've agreed to raise these funds for this organization. This is how much we believe in this organization. So it helps because it's not buried in your annual appeal. It's not buried in your, program revenue fees, whatever. It calls it out. So I like that approach, but it's a culture thing. Organizations have to agree to do that. And so participation first is key. Giving to the extent that you can, whatever that looks like, is key. Most organizations function on a lot of people giving a little bit of money. That's how you build the base, right? Fundraising pyramid kind of 101. You build a strong base. So some board members, I'd rather have somebody that gave $50 for 40 years than the one-time gift of $1,000 and then they go away. Like over the long haul, it's actually much more beneficial that I have a consistent donor than I have those one-offs. And that's really what you want in your board, is you want to have that kind of giving history and culture so that they continue to give even when they're not on the board, but at those levels. And also, you can't make the assumption always that lower income means they give less, because we have good research that suggests lower income individuals give higher percentages of their discretionary income to philanthropy and charitable organizations than higher income levels. So you can't assume that the teacher won't be able to afford as much as the doctor. That may or may not be true. You don't know their own personal wealth. That is kind of a one-on-one discussion. So have those discussions as a board. What is our collective goal? Come up with that goal, and then everybody contributes to that amount to the degree that they can. So those are some of my kind of backgrounds and suggestions. I don't know if Monique, if you have others. You've been on board, so you've been also on the soliciting side too.
Yeah, it's interesting because some boards, I was on one board, they said every board member gives $1,500, period. And on another board, we did more of a sliding scale. I totally agree with everything that Alicia has shared. We did have a goal. And we had to have a long discussion because one of the boards that I'm on right now, we work with kids in Mombasa, Kenya. And so we really support schools and the kids. And so we have a number of different projects. Well, some projects pull towards your heartstrings. You know, I want to give to girls empowerment. I want to give to economic empowerment. And so we had to make a decision as a board. All money that comes from board members goes to the general fund.
Yep.
If you want to give to a particular project, then that's above and beyond what we've agreed as a board. So that's
Perfect.
one thing that you may decide. You may not. You may decide it's okay if they give separately, because we did that initially, and that it wasn't working in ways that would be helpful. But some were so committed that the level was very high. And then we created a sliding scale because we have people with different levels of expertise. Some are very good at communicating. So they're always going to be the editors for documents. They're always going to be the creators of documents, whether it's presentations that are going out or newsletters. We have another member that had a great background in terms of accountancy. And so we did a sliding scale to say, how many hours are you given? And that can equate to part of your dollars, not all of your dollars. You still have time towards certain projects. We came out with a figure of time when we had in-person fundraising projects that you had to be there. You had to sell at a certain level, you had to give at a certain level. But sometimes the sliding scale allows you some latitude that is also helpful, so you can tap into the resources and gifts and talents that people bring to the table where it's not 100% equal in terms of finances.
Yeah. So there were a couple other questions. One I saw that about a size of the board, and then how do you suggest the board to do that? So around size, the boards that are startup boards. So in the state of Illinois, you only have to have 3 members, which is fine if you're going to stay very small. So legally, 3 you're covered. However, most boards, especially early on, you're doing a lot of the work for the organization. So a lot of your first boards, and I don't use the term working boards because I think all boards work, but the boards that are more hands-on in the day-to-day stuff are startups. So they tend to grow organically, like, oh, you can do the newsletter and I'm going to hire the staff and I'm going to whatever. So they tend to divvy up things. So the boards can grow a little bit like that. I would say it starts to get unwieldy when you get like over 12, 13, 14, because then getting consensus gets a lot harder when those boards get that big. Some boards grow through, partnerships in history. Like, we need so many board members from here. We want to make sure and then the board starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's just very hard to get consensus and to act as a cohesive board. So I would say 8 to 12 is great. I will say that most boards grow larger based on the size of their budget and the complexity of their organization. So if you're looking at a national organization, they're going to have a much bigger board than a kind of a smaller local organization. 8 to 12 to me is an ideal size. And I don't know, Monique, in your experience working with boards, is there a particular size that you think works better together?
I think 3 is low, but 3 is great for creating mission statements and vision statements and easy agreement, to be really honest with you, small numbers. I agree with you in terms of 8 to 12, because as you start to grow, the work starts to grow.
Yeah.
Your lives don't change, your work lives don't change, or they might, and the level of commitment might rise in other areas. And so you'll find that board members, I found this myself as a board member, and actually came off of one board because I realized that I couldn't make the commitment that I'd agreed to. It was in Chicago and I needed to drive into Chicago and needed to be there face to face. And we were interviewing a new board member and it took me 4 hours to get into Chicago that day. So this is before we used all the technology. I ended up calling in on a cell phone, and for me, it wasn't the right fit. And it happened a couple of times. So I just sat down with the chair and said, I'm willing to give anything as a member, but I can't serve as a board member and not be in the leadership role in terms of being at the table. And being invested in the way that you need board members to be there in terms of time. But I do think 8 to 12, when you start to get really large, you get beyond 15 is hard because you're also juggling schedules.
Yeah, right.
And I'm not
when
saying
do we meet?
When do we meet? That's where the advisory board or junior boards are also helpful. It's one more thing to manage, but it's also kind of growing your own. I would say the other thing we haven't talked about is training the board to make sure everyone has an equitable starting point. So that's really important. I know there are a number of other questions that are out here. And yeah, I don't have anything beyond that. I want
Yeah.
to be able to spend as much time on
Well,
it.
you know, thinking about that kind of orientation, and we'll move kind of, you know, a little bit into what kind of some suggestions is once you've figured out that you really, so I do a lot of strategic planning consulting sometimes. And the first question I ask is, why do you want to do strategic planning? So you have to have that question. Why do you want a diverse board? Like, honest to goodness, why do you want one? Because it's going to bring up stuff. You're going to have difficult conversations. You're going to have to change the way you think. Sometimes you're going to have to reevaluate what you do. If you don't want to change, you don't have to. Your organization can stay the exact same way that it is. However, if you want to do things differently, you want to get new ideas, you want to try different things, then it's going to require some change. And that requires a little bit of faith and a lot of trust in the people around that table to make that happen. The other thing is don't be afraid that some people aren't ready for that. There will be board members who are like, look, you're going in this new direction. Like, I really don't think we need the 20 something on this board. That's just a pain in the butt that we have to explain things for, whatever. It's okay. You don't have to serve, right? Board members can leave the organization at any time. It's a voluntary experience. You're not bound to keep them. It's okay. You will need a strong chair to have those conversations. And that's probably the key role in an organization when it comes to is that board chair. The board chair, and if you have staff, that CEO relationship. Who's going to lead this board through change? It's going to have somebody strong at the top to say, hey, it looks like, Monique, you're not able to make a lot of meetings. You haven't been at the last 4. It might be time to step away. You know, in this case, you went to them, but that's also the board's chair responsibility to make sure that they're living up to those expectations. So I think that's part of it, is being open to things. And then just transparency. So Monique brought up before about who's on your board currently. Like, who are they? Can I find those people on your website? Because you want me to go on your board. I want to know, am I going to be comfortable there? Are there people like me already there? Right. Naturally, we're going to gravitate towards people that we have something in common. So is there a picture of on your website? Do you just list names? Is there a bio? Is there contact so I can reach out to somebody, or they can, so we can start to develop that trust? Board recruitment is really a long game when it comes to that. So are you willing to be that level of transparent? And trust. If you're an organization that has typically served this part of the community and now you want to serve this, and you don't have any faith that you can actually do that, what have you done? Can you demonstrate that you've made some, efforts in that area, or you've tried different things or whatever? They will, all of those things I think are important when you're doing board recruitment. Is they're gonna investigate you as much as you're going to investigate them. And so make things really open and accessible, particularly I think, and Monique, I'm curious what you think, particularly when you're reaching out to folks who are not represented now. Like, I'm sure you get asked to sit on many many boards, and they're like, oh, she's at NIU, she's educated, she's African American female. Like, wow, that's great. But if you go to their list of board members or their organization, there's nothing in there that says they really are trying to move in that direction, and you will be accepted and your voice, will be respected when you go there. I'm sure people are checking organizations out just as much as you're checking them out.
It's so true. We have a number of questions. I'm trying to combine them because I want to make
Okay.
sure we try to address them. But speaking to specifically increasing diversity on your board, and how do you ask, and what does the outreach look like? I think you should put together, we call it a prospectus, but just a communication piece that speaks to your goals, that speaks to the very things that you hold dear. It might speak to previous board members. I think if you have not had a diverse board, and if we're talking whatever that is, racial, gender identity, gender, whatever it may be, socioeconomic status, be accountable to that and say, we haven't been diverse in these ways, but we recognize that that is something that we need to change. Like, you because that's the question I'm going to ask. If I look your board up and I don't see diversity, I'm going to look as broad as I can, and I'm going to go, and this isn't a good task, but I'm going to tell you I do it because everyone does. Then I'm going to go Google these people.
I knew it. I knew you were going to say that.
The bad thing about Googling is
it may not be accurate. Yeah.
Right. You should Google yourselves, by the way, because I've been quoted.
And your organization all the time. Yeah.
Google it.
Yeah. I mean, and set up Google alerts, which you can do. Anybody can set a Google alert.
Yes, you can.
So every time your name or organization shows up anywhere online, you get an alert. I like those too.
Yeah. Now, the sad thing is they're not always accurate.
No.
There's some things out there, and I don't recall giving the interview, and I remember interviews, but fortunately they're positive because you can't really get rid of them. but you got to be able to address it. But you got to be accountable. So be ready for the tough questions. If you're an all male board and you're asking other gender identities and genders to come aboard, do you think that people aren't going to notice?
Right.
And I'm going to pay attention to how you react when I ask you the question. I say it's the first 3 to 6 seconds, which is why I really like in person, because it's virtual and doesn't give you the whole body language. But how did you respond? What did you look like when you responded? Did you even look sincere when you said that to me? Oh, yes, we really want to make sure we diversify. And we all feel that way, right? So we're all reading body language. It's okay, be accountable. I would say the other thing is try to bring more than one person of whatever you're trying to diversify.
I was going to say that too, almost like a cohort idea. And some people said, how do you start is we know here at the university, when we can hire as a cohort, it's much better because they feel like they're all starting from the same place and there's more support for them. So if you're thinking of adding board members, do new board members like 3 at a time or 4 at a time or something, so that you're adding a new cohort of folks that can really be supported through the process of recruitment, orientation, training, all of that stuff.
And when you're rotating, they're going to rotate together.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, and I'm not saying you're going to go out and say, oh, we're going to bring in on our board 3 Black people. I'm not saying that. Whatever your diversity looks like, bring in, when we say cohort, it's the diverse cohort.
Yeah, right.
Some of the other questions that are out there, and how do you approach it? I think you approach it like any other. I know it's scary when maybe you haven't been exposed to whatever the group is that you're getting ready to make this ask to serve on your board. I think you approach it like anything else that is important to you that you're sincere about. If they don't respond to you appropriately, that's on them, that's not on you. If there's something you need to learn about communication, you may say, did I do something to offend you in my approach?
And you'll learn if you did.
Share that with you, right? Yeah. And that's okay, it's all a learning experience. Some people just aren't really friendly people.
That's okay.
So there's that too. We all, run into that.
Yeah.
There's a question out here that says, so I would say the connections and the outreach. One, put together a piece that you can share, because then you're equitably sharing the information.
And that explains why you want to do this. I mean, why is it important for the organization to do this? I think is really, really important. What are your goals around this? How does it align with your future plans? Something so I know I'm contributing more than like, it was our goal to attract a female on their board this year. Like, no, that's not enough.
Right. I don't want to be a token. And I have been on lots of search committees.
Yeah.
A number of institutions. And I knew it, but I still took the position because they were trying and I knew I could learn. And sometimes it was the best opportunities.
Yeah.
The best opportunity I've been involved in, but they were sincere about it and they were honest. And they said, okay, Monique, there is no one that's diverse on it, but we know you, we know your background, and we think it'd be helpful.
Yeah.
Could you give it some thought?
Yeah.
The other thing, they weren't really pushy, even if they gave me a timeline. There's another question out here that says, so hopefully that's helpful with the connections and outreach. There's another question that says, what if you're bored with your board? I have to admit, I laughed. In my head, I was laughing because that has happened. We've had that happen on boards that I've served on, and it's not working. They're not energized. They're not taking us anywhere. And that's an open discussion you have to say. I think we need to turn our board over. One of the boards that I serve on, the founding members were serving there. And I got involved really because I knew one of the founding members and was just going out to help pack a container to send to Africa. I didn't even know what a container was. They said, what are you doing this weekend? Okay, I've got some time, I'll come help. When you see them sending very simple things to another country to help kids, I was in. But we had to have a tough conversation. I had to ask them, are you always going to be aboard of these founders? Because I'm not.
Yeah.
Founder, I think we need some different people. And they were split. So some said, no, we need to change it. Some said, no, we need to maintain it. And we had an outside consultant come in that did not-for-profit work. Yeah. And she agreed to do a workshop. And one of the first things she said is, you got to get over that.
Yeah.
Or you will never meet your mission and your goals.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you need an outside person to come in, even though you need to have a conversation yourself first, but sometimes you need the outside.
A little bit of facilitation. Yeah.
We see that at Northern. We have tons of experts. But we'll go get somebody else from another institution because our faculty and staff are more apt to listen to them sometimes. So sometimes you need a little help with it.
I know the other things to recruit. I mean, we, by nature, we're going to recruit people that are close to us in our circle. So if you have a very small circle, it's going to be hard to find other people outside that look differently or come from different backgrounds. So when I think of, there's a number of different ideas. One is to look at your community leaders in business or in churches and faith houses of worship and faith communities. Look for leaders there who are more diverse, who aren't like you, that as a starting point, like, hey, can we have a conversation? I'd really like to recruit, some who are younger or some who come from a different ethnicity or whatever. Can you help me identify what's the best way to do that? So chambers of commerce have leadership academies. They're folks from kind of all different backgrounds that go through there. They learn about the community, they learn about boards, and they're going to get snatched up to a nonprofit board generally before they even get out of the leadership academy. There's a little bit of an expectation, and that's a good thing, because it is about having the experience to want to serve, the willingness to serve, and then being asked. It's the number one reason why people serve on boards, because somebody asked them to do it. But how do you get to the point of identifying those individuals? That is on the ground, making connections, networking with people who aren't like you, who don't circulate in the same circles, who don't go to your same church, who don't live in your same neighborhood. You have to figure out, how can I get to some of those community leaders or those communities? Who do I know that can connect me? You're looking for the connectors. And sometimes that's through houses of worship. Sometimes that's through the business community. If you're not in those circles, how can I get into those circles? How can I have somebody kind of guide me through that, work with me, and build that kind of trust and relationships over time? It does take time. I think that's some of the suggestions that I have, to reach out beyond communities that just aren't like you. So we're not just, self-perpetuating.
I agree. I think the other you have to look at it. I call it flamingo moments. And so it's those uncomfortable moments. I call it flamingo moments because flamingos stand very easily on one leg. But we do not. If you're in yoga, you probably do, or gymnast. But most of us don't stand on one leg very easily. So it's that uncomfortable moment. I think at that moment, quite honestly, it's also the most opportune time for education. People are reaching for balance, they're reaching for something. But I've tried to put myself in those uncomfortable situations. And quite honestly, as a woman of color who also identifies as LGBTQ, as a LGBTQ person, I've been involved in so many different things. It's hard for me to get into an uncomfortable arena because I've been in many of them, just because it's the way life works.
What makes Monique uncomfortable? I was just going to say, there's probably not much.
No, because I kind of like learning about other people and being challenged. Yeah, I'm just kind of made up that way. But I would say, what are those, like, what is the place of worship you haven't been?
Yeah.
What are some of the community places that you haven't been? Are there community organizations?
Yeah.
I know we were years ago, they had a Black, what's it called? Black Coaches Association. And a white athletic director walked in, and we all turned because everyone identified either as Black, African-American, Latinx. And so we invited him to our table. We said, come on over. We have a spot. And he did. And so, we talked about different things. And then we said, okay, here's the elephant in the room. What made you come to the conference? We are glad that you are here.
Right.
But quite honestly, why did you come to the conference?
Right.
Because your colleagues haven't come. We've gone to other conferences that are predominantly white. And he said, I want to diversify my staff. And so I'm coming here hopefully to make connections.
Yeah.
He called a number of us probably 2 weeks later. He called every time he had an opening.
That's
and
amazing.
We worked hard to try to help him fill that spot because we knew he had put himself in an uncomfortable situation and we greatly respected it. So sometimes just the art of doing that, people are going to recognize it. Like, you know what? Alicia's the real deal because she showed up when she didn't have to.
Right. And she looked uncomfortable.
She looked uncomfortable, but she did it. Hey, she don't run out of here. And there might be events that are happening. Yeah. I mean, don't go if you don't believe in something.
Right.
But sometimes we don't go because we know we're going to be by ourselves.
Yeah.
We're going to be slightly uncomfortable. Don't go if you think you're unsafe. But if it's not a safety issue and it's a level of discomfort, I would say once you start reaching out to one or two, people will help you and you'll get more adept at it. Alicia, they also want information on the board and governance class.
Yeah, I'll definitely send some more information on that. You know, as you're chatting, the other thing I was thinking of is like Brene Brown and vulnerability. You know,
Yes.
sometimes so I immigrated to the United States 1997. Grew up in a rural area very similar to DeKalb, but my life experience before 20 was like the size of a quarter. Like that was kind of it. My grandmother would tease that we were diverse because we had Irish Catholics and Polish Catholics. Like no joke, right? That's my background. And I worked for a year in New York City because we were living outside of New Jersey. Everything was new, I swear. Every day I was like, what is that? How does that what? Everything was new. You have to be very vulnerable and open to learning new things and new way of thinking that doesn't jive with your own background. This doesn't make sense in my brain, but I have to figure out how this makes sense. And I remember thinking about this when I was in my doctoral program at Rutgers in New Jersey. I was driving home back to kids and stuff. And I remember driving by a laundromat at 10 o'clock at night, and a woman was in there with her two kids. And in my head, I'm like, I don't get it. Like, one, you're out at 10 o'clock at night, you're in a laundromat with two kids. So I get the single mother thing, but 10 o'clock at night, it was very, very late. It was a school night for the kids. And she was waiting for the bus and had laundry baskets on top of that and a stroller. And I was like, damn, like I grew up with a single mom in a rural area. We didn't do that. Like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what it's like to live in an urban setting, relying on public transportation as a single mom. That's not something I know. So, how do I get to know those experiences and how they impact the people that we want to serve up close when it's not my own experience? So that whole Brene Brown and vulnerability, that's really what this work requires, is owning your own experience, however limited that it is. What's my personal background? And then what are we missing? What do I think I need to support this organization and move this mission forward that isn't represented? I think that these are really hard things to do. As an individual, you have to go through some soul searching too, and we're going to make mistakes. We're not going to use the right fill in the blank. We're not going to use the right name. We're not going to use the right this. We're going to mess up, you know, where I come from, it was Polish and Catholic. So I mangle all Spanish names. It's terrible. I speak a little bit of French, but Spanish does not roll off. It just doesn't. And spice in my house, my husband will tease that it was like salt and pepper, like seriously. So that's my limited background. If I just keep in that box and only limit it myself to those experiences, there's a whole other world that I'm missing. And that's really what boards have to be comfortable with, is you should own your own experience, because you bring in a really diverse perspective, whatever that is. But what are we missing? I think that's really the key. What are we missing? So yes, being accountable for your own discomfort. Whew, I've been in those situations. Very, very uncomfortable about my own limited view of the world sometimes. How did I not know that? I didn't know that. I just didn't. I'd never seen a rat, which is weird. But I never seen a rat because I never grew up. I'm sure Monique growing up in Detroit, that might be more common in Detroit. Where I was more likely to see a bear than, than a rat. I'd never seen one.
And it's funny, I didn't see it in Detroit, but I can't remember what city I was in. I was like, oh my goodness, this thing is big as a cat.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And I don't mind things that crawl from a distance. Like I love zoos and I like aquariums, but I don't want them crawling in my small,
No.
whatever it is, from an ant to whatever.
Right. Think about like all of the things that your missions address, like poverty and homelessness and all those big stuff. What does that mean to you, and what does it mean to the people that you serve? What are you not getting? Right? I think of the term safety, right? Safety is very, very personal. I did my doctoral program in Newark, New Jersey, and you can look them up. It's a lot of violence, but I never felt unsafe there. Safety is a personal thing. People who grew up in a rural area, I know kids, we have lots of students who grew up in Chicago. When they get out to large open spaces that are completely dark, they feel very unsafe. They're like, where did all the lights go? How come it's so dark here? Right? Safety is very, very personal. So when your missions are trying to improve safety or improve housing or whatever that looks like, we all define those things differently. And so when you have those discussions around your mission and values, that's going to be different for certain people and on your board, especially.
There are some other questions out here. One, So I'll go back up to Marsha's.
Okay.
And there's a seminar out there. What do you do in terms of establishing your boards? Like, how do you get this started? Marsha actually has a question, but it's a good idea as well. Does it make sense to look at established groups in the community that exist for people organized for their particular diversity background, diversityness? Yes. And sometimes you just partner with them. We've done that as a non-for-profit, gone to different groups and just said, we know you're working on this. Your goals seem to be similar to what ours are. Is there a way for us to partner, or at least for us to just have a discussion? Sometimes just the discussion itself, they may provide resources, and resources sometimes are just people. But I think once you establish that, they're also, we're all in it for the right reasons.
Right.
We all have these goals to make something better. And so that's an excellent question, but it's a great idea. So the answer to that is absolutely yes.
I like that kind of low stakes kind of partnership. Maybe it's a program that you guys are doing together, that you co-sponsor something that their audience is going to be more diverse, and have people mix. Proximity matters when we can be together. Proximity really does matter. So I think doing that as a co-sponsored event or a co-sponsored program, I think would be great.
And again, there's questions about what about international board, or what happens if you don't know who your board members are in advance. It always comes down to your mission, your vision, and goals. You don't have something in there written about diversity and inclusion and equity in a very sincere way, I'm going to see it. So when you ask me to serve on your board, I'm going to come back and ask you. And maybe you just didn't,
think about it. Yeah.
So it doesn't mean I'm going to say no, but that's where people start. And it's a reminder of where you're going. You might not have a diverse board, but that's your goal. And to continue to do that, you're going to get there. And it's a long term. It is a really long haul. We would love to do it in a short term. We're still trying to figure out how to do it at the non-for-profit Northern Illinois University in many areas.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's never done. It's never, you're never going to get this perfect. It's never going to be complete, because we're always going to be involving in the community and the people that you serve. So no, this is an ongoing thing. It's not going to be a 2021 goal or anything like that.
Yeah, Shiraz poses a question that is probably even more important now that people recognize call it a racial awakening. We know there are nasty things that happen across the world, but in the United States as a result of really systemic oppression. There's lots of isms, but this country was built on the fact that certain people are supposed to have power and we're going to have power and others weren't. It's not even debatable, and it hasn't gone away. So what happens a lot of times, Shiraz poses a question, what if there's someone that's the only person of color on a board, POC, and they see things that need to be addressed, but it can be exhaustive. Like I may see things, how much am I going to continue to put myself out there? And there's no easy answer to that. What I would say is don't always go to that board member. Like I've said to people, you've got to do your own education. Google things, go out there, try to read, watch a movie, like do all the work that you can do and come back with a somewhat educated response. Because as you do that, you're going to start to see things as well. We all have biases. We all have prejudices, all of us. But collectively, the more that we learn, the more that we recognize what they are. Our job is to take care of our own biases and then work collectively. So if you have one person, one woman, one person of color, one young person, they can't always be the voice for everyone because they can't do that anyway. But you don't want to go to them and you don't want to expect them to always give you the information. So you might say, you know what, are there any movies out there or books or webinars that you might suggest that I could learn about this? I think that's a fair question, as opposed to saying, why are all, blah, blah, blah this way? Monique, why are all the people that look like you angry and wear brown on Tuesdays? I mean, that's the wrong question. The right question, and to be honest, if you ask me, I had a question. I'd have a conversation with you, but I'm kind of open like that. But I would say that everyone has a responsibility to do their own work.
Yeah.
The other piece is constantly where, we have lots of questions about how do you build and what do you do? Make sure your foundation is solid. You got to be serious about really wanting to have an inclusive board.
Yep.
And you got to define what that looks like.
Yep.
And you might not do it today, you might not do it tomorrow. A lot of times we all have to go do work and figure out what that is, and then we grow, and that's okay. That's the part that I started with, which is give yourself grace.
It's okay. Give yourself grace. I love it. So I'll end the recording